everybody. It's Christian Bacassi, your host for the Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. Today's guest, we've got Peter Snyder on the line. Peter is from Africa and is going to really help us out today and understand the fly fishing region of South Africa in general. Go through how that's kind of laid out and the different river types, fish types, etc. So I'm excited about that. And Peter, you've been competitively fly fishing for 3 or 4 years now. You've been guiding for quite a while. You have a business, streamandsea.com, if you want to go to check that out. That does travel and destination fishing in the regions. But in addition to that, you've become quite the expert when it comes to, really fishing around the region and utilizing the various resources, et cetera. So we're not only going to talk about the region, but at the end of the show, we're going to go into a topic that's really kind of interesting, and that is your specialty of dry fly fishing and how, some ways, it compares to what we deal with here in the States. And that is that the entomology side, so the hatch side, is about the same, but what really changes is the actual type of species that you're fishing to for dry flies. So I'm really looking forward to that. Let's just jump in right now and get going. So you guys are dealing with some power outages and whatnot there lately, it sounds like, but the fishing's still good. So we'll stick to fishing. Why don't you start off by kind of defining what the South Africa region is, because Africa is an enormous continent in space. So let's put some kind of guardrails around that first.
Okay. Yeah, so personally, I stay in Gauteng, South Africa. It's a province in the middle of South Africa. My business partner is down in the Western Cape. Most people know Cape Town, so that's quite a good landmark. So he's down there. But yeah, Southern Africa is kind of like confined to a few countries. So South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, a little bit of Zambia, and then like Namibia and Botswana. So that's more like your southern tip. In these regions, for example, I would say the most popular targets on fly is basically like the local species is more like your yellowfish species. Another popular or known species that I think most people know is like the tigerfish. There's obviously a few species that's available, but in the southern part, there's mostly like one specific species. And then, but we predominantly fishing for yellowfish. And then about over 100 years ago, trout was also introduced to some of our more mountain regions. So we do have quite a bit of trout fishing available. And then there's also a few areas that that's stocked, like stocked lakes,
Okay.
with trouts. And then, but we do fish for a lot of odd species, like sharp-toothed catfish. They quite similar to your flathead, maybe. So quite a big fish. They can get up to probably close to 100 pounds. That would be quite a big specimen, but or record size. But on fly, I've got them up to about 40 pounds. So quite a nice species to target on maybe like a 9 weight. Our yellowfish species, we predominantly fish for 2 species, the small and the largemouth yellowfish, which
and to define yellowfish, I think for our audience, if those that aren't familiar, it's similar to a carp in a lot of ways.
They look similar to that, yes. I almost think something more relatable is like your fall fish
Okay.
in America, or even like something like whitefish, because they're quite they're quite a bit more aggressive than a carp. Um, Especially the largemouth yellowfish is the biggest species of yellowfish. They can A trophy size would be about 20 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And they're quite, as they've got quite a big mouth. And you typically catch them kind of like similar tactics that you would use for smallmouth bass, I would say.
Okay.
Like they sit on similar type of structure. They're a bit of a lazy fish. You normally lose them in the first 2 seconds, because they give you everything in that first few seconds,
Okay.
and then they kind of just don't fight anymore. So, but I mean, I've snapped off 15-pound tippet straight just with a
Oh, wow.
one hit. So they just
Very
destroy your
powerful.
fly, and then and they're quite they're kind of in that almost like a permit type territory, where like a real
Weary
asshole
fish.
fish.
Yeah.
Yeah, more like
Yeah.
an asshole, I would say.
Yeah.
Like some days you kind of like doubt yourself, like, are these things even out there?
Yeah. Yeah. Are they
So
picky in nature in that way, or are they spooky in
um
nature, or both?
I think I think they're quite similar to something like a muskie. Like
Hmm.
very, if the weather is a bit not like or a bit odd, then they're not on the bites. Or if the moon phase is not right, or anything like that, those fish are just not gonna take a fly. But then some days you get to the river, you maybe get 7 in the morning,
Hmm.
or two of them in two casts, like. So it's a very odd fish in that way. And sometimes they'll follow your fly all the way to your rod tip and never eat the fly. So, but the more forgiving smallmouth yellowfish is kind of like baby brother of the largemouth yellowfish, and they in quite prolific numbers. They can be found in very similar type of water that trout would sit. But the main difference is it's not a static fish. So they'll move in and out of pockets where you would expect a trout to sit static. But
Mm-hmm.
these yellows are constantly like feeding, like next moment they're upstream, downstream, their head is always moving. And if you ever fish for them, so they typically in the Vol Orange system, which is one of our biggest rivers. It's our two biggest rivers, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But these two rivers can be fairly dirty at some stages. Some spots can be very clear. For example, we do a hosted trip to the lower Vol, to a venue we call Diamond River, which is it's kind of like they used to mine there, so there was these like kind of like funny structures and stuff in the river. But this part of the Vaal River gets crystal clear. Like you can sight fish for these things on
Hmm.
dry fly, and the smallmouth and largemouth are often together, but just like slightly different water. Like
Mm-hmm.
but the smallmouth, I mean, sometimes like at this venue, for example, you could be drifting your dry fly over like 100 of them. And then if you get a drag-free drift, one will pop out the school and just come and eat it.
Mm-hmm.
And flies like hoppers, mayfly, caddis, and we do get like nice like hatches in the afternoons on these bigger rivers. Um, but what's quite cool about smallmouth yellowfish is you can find them kind of like in these kind of like very like flat type rivers that don't have a lot of features, but you can also
Hmm.
find them up in the up in the mountain regions.
Okay.
Um, like for example, we hosting a trip to um, a river called the Bokong River. So the Bokong is up in one of like our neighboring countries, Lesotho, and this is very high altitude. Like it's basically like 3,000 plus meters above sea level. So that would be about 9,000 feet.
Right.
Um, so very high altitude, and they similar behavior. Um, but now you've got more of a kind of like maybe like a freestone type river, very low insect numbers. So these fish are almost rising towards anything because they're so kind of like looking for food, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And in between these yellowfish, then you also get like rainbow and brown trouts, which was also introduced in the 70s into Lesotho. So, and what makes this specific venue quite interesting is at some point they dammed that river, and now the yellowfish kind of like got trapped in there, and the only way they can go and spawn is up these rivers. So now you get this like kind of like new scenario where they had to like kind of like run up these rivers almost like salmon.
Yeah.
And it literally sometimes looks like a snake going up the river for like maybe like 4 miles, and it's just like a snake of fish, you know.
Now,
So it's very
are the browns and bows then feeding on their eggs too? Is that uh,
um
in similarity?
yeah, I think they all just eat each other basically.
Yeah.
I've because they if you swing a streamer through there, sometimes you can pick up a yellowfish, you can pick up a trout. There's this weird fish we call a mudfish. So they they're similar to your suckers.
Hmm.
They've got like this kind of like underslung, and sometimes they also even eat the streamers because they're all this. There's not a lot of food in the system.
Hmm.
But what makes that interesting is that it causes the fish to rise, you know, like, and because there's so many yellows, it's actually very difficult to catch the trouts because they such prolific numbers. I mean, the first time I went there, you know, it wasn't odd getting like 40, 50 fish in a day on dry fly, you know,
Hmm.
and like yellowfish, you can definitely get 100 fish in a day. If you like, typically we fishing for them mostly like the bigger rivers. We mostly fish for them like Euro nymphing type tactics.
Okay.
Um, very successful kind of like techniques to target them. Um, I would say the only difference I kind of like employ for example, when I fish for them, is I kind of like employ like a lot of like activations or little strikes in my Euro nymphing drifts,
So
just
you're
because
like
they
jigging.
such
You're almost kind
you
of
know like little
lifting.
like a like for example I developed my own citrus stick material, you know, that
Hmm.
you can like, it looks like a little lipstick that you put on the leader.
Okay.
And I put like little half-inch marks close to my flies, and I literally look at that and make like little strikes. And sometimes it actually helps because like certain times of the day, the like caddis pupa start like going to the surface, so they actually like that bit of movement.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the other thing it does is because they're quite dynamic feeders, they're never facing upstream always, so they're kind of like turning to the side or they're feeding downstream. So if you do a drift, you can imagine very difficult to set the hook on these fish because they also have soft mouths, so like very
Yeah.
similar to a carp, but and they can like blow out your fly very quickly. So
Mm.
so, but that's why it's quite a nice target to when they actually come up for dry flies. It's actually quite nice um, because then obviously then they actually tend to sit and face upstream.
Mm-hmm.
But they'll often do a compound rise as well and actually follow your dry fly like downstream.
Almost like a cutthroat or
Or
something.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I've actually had very weird behavior also where they kind of sit vertical in the water and literally just track with your fly and then suddenly eat it.
Huh.
So so very interesting feeding fish. And like I've mentioned, like we don't get like these massive prolific hatches like you get in the States, I think. Um, we do have some smaller tributaries that, on occasions you get that real like hatches where, like when you put your headlamp on, these
They're
caddis
everywhere.
are
Yeah.
just like, yeah. So we do get that in occasions. And even on the bigger rivers, like we get like a real big caddis, like maybe like an inch long, like
Mm-hmm.
the wing part of it. Um, so one of my friends, Herman Boertes, he's probably the I would say the guy that spent the most time fishing for yellowfish. And he's he's like one of my mentors, I would say. Like like it's one of those guys you just want to record them. Because he's just spent so much time on the water. He's in his 50s, so he's spent years fishing for yellowfish,
Yeah.
and I've learned so much about like hatches, and like I mentioned to you like before the talk, uh, it was so fascinating when I had this one trip to New Zealand and I was fishing on the Tongariro River. Um, and it was so strange because I saw these caddis coming off and I thought to myself, well, this looks very similar, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and literally put one of the flies on that I tied for South Africa. And it was just like, I think you would know this fly, a type of foam head caddis, like a Gary LaFontaine um, foam head caddis. And it's like
Yeah.
that packing foam, and it's
Yeah.
such a good pattern. I mean, the only real thing you adapt is the color of the dubbing, um, but the real essence of the fly is still there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I actually bought some Gary LaFontaine books from the States because it's so difficult to find these books, and you can't find it even online.
Mm-hmm.
But it's amazing how like a guy like that, um, like his knowledge kind of is like it's global,
Universal.
universal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Transcended it to your region. Yeah.
yeah. So we do get very interesting type of hatches, and like it's very similar to trout fishing. But yeah, like I've mentioned to you, we also have a lot of carp in our systems. Um, like I'm quite a fan because when I started fly fishing, I lived in an area that would be quite a farming type area.
Mm-hmm.
So not a lot of, there weren't like a lot of rivers, but there was a lot of these kind of like shallow farm ponds. And the only fish that live in these like areas is carp, sharp-tooth catfish, and largemouth bass that people
Okay.
stocked here in South Africa. So, yeah, I mean, South Africa has got quite a big bass culture as well. You know, like you do get like the bass boats, and there's actually guys that go and compete in the States. So, so we do have quite a fun thing to fish for because on fly, because they're so, like for example, there's a dam here down the road from me in the city.
Mm-hmm.
Again, only fish in there: carp, largemouth bass, sharp-tooth catfish. I call them the urban trio. So, so yeah. So I mean, so bass is actually quite a relatable. You know, like we do have a bit of smallmouth bass, like in a few rivers,
Okay.
like largemouth bass is kind of like you can almost see it as a bit of a pest because they do compete with some of our local fish. But it's for personally, I've also fish a lot for them on fly because just like nice availability, um, and you can easily get 100 of them in a day.
Okay.
Yeah, because we've got a lot of lakes that's like crystal clear, weed beds, that typical like popper fishing. So yeah, so there's a lot of like I would say global type fishing in South Africa as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the unique species definitely, like I mentioned, we've got those two main ones, the yellowfish, but we also have like we've got other ones as well. So you get like large and small scale, which they are only in northern flowing rivers,
Hmm.
that goes out. So it's kind of like rivers that would mouth out on the east coast, of
Okay.
South Africa. And what's interesting is, for example, I can drive about 45 minutes from my house out the city. And to give you an idea, I stay in a place called Johannesburg, and it's a massive city. Like
Yes.
I think it I think it's called it's one of the biggest man-made forests. Like it's like quite a wide city. But for example, I can drive, for example, like to the one side of the city and catch large and small scale. And then if I drive about an hour to the other side, I can catch um, like smallmouth and largemouth yellowfish. So you
Hmm.
can catch like four species.
In a
And
pretty small
then,
region, yeah.
yeah, and then there's a few other ones as well. There's like the Natal yellowfish. So Natal is basically KwaZulu Natal is like one of the provinces.
Mm-hmm.
In that province, you only get the one species. That province is also quite known for good sized brown trouts. I wouldn't say as big as anything on your side, but maybe like a 24-inch fish would be quite a big fish, you
Yeah.
know.
That's
Um,
that's quite a big fish for most regions in the states. There are
yeah,
areas where, but
yeah,
a 20-inch fish in most states in the U.S. that's considered a prized brown trout
yeah.
or
So
rainbow.
yeah, so those are some of the oldest rivers that were stocked with brown trout. Also, quite a favorite fish for me to target. We often also on the competition scene, um, would kind of like go fish in those rivers, just because it's a bit more relatable to what you might find at a Worlds.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And
so we kind
are
of,
the yellowfin not as prolific in those rivers as you had described earlier in some of the high mountain streams where you were saying, hey,
yeah,
it's
so
rare to get a trout because there's so much popularity of the yellowfish?
the Natal yellowfish, they kind of just live alongside them. But there's definitely kind of like a zone on the river beyond a certain point. You won't get the Natal yellowfish going that high up. It's kind of
Okay.
like as soon as you start getting the real kind of like pocket water,
Okay.
um, you'll start getting less and less Natal yellowfish, and they might be like smaller ones.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a bit of a transition zone. We would find the yellowfish. The smallmouth yellowfish tend they actually go pretty high up. Like there's an area called Rhodes or Barkley East. Also, like a lot of rivers that's got trout in them, but a lot of those rivers in kind of like the summer months. So that would be December. That's maybe also something nice to mention if anybody is ever keen to travel. Like it's a pretty inexpensive place to travel to South Africa,
Hmm.
especially because of the exchange rates. But the other nice thing is when it's your deep winter, it's our summer. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
at the moment we've got our winter now, and it's well, our winter is a bit of a joke. It's like pretty much like 3 months, and if it, I don't know, like I'll have to do the conversion, but
But what is it
like
Celsius?
yeah, so it's like if it's like I'll quickly work it out here. 60 Celsius to
So, 60 Celsius, you say?
Fahrenheit. Yeah, so maybe like our winter, a pretty cold day is about 60 Fahrenheit.
Oh,
So
60 Fahrenheit. Okay. I was going to say,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So
So
15
on
degrees, 20
average,
degrees.
yeah. So our summer gets to about 86 Fahrenheit,
Yeah.
but it can often go higher than that. So we've got like nice hot summers, but yeah, pretty much. So we basically have 9 months of pretty much good fishing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then winter months is kind of like when guys do kind of like lake fishing. And for example, that other podcast that I listened on your podcast about, like we try to do a bit of like that Loch style
Oh, yeah.
drifts.
Yeah. You're talking about the
Yeah,
Josh Jelly
yes,
podcast we did. Yeah. Okay.
yeah. So we do have fairly big lakes, but not not like massive. Like but fair enough. You can maybe get like 3, 4, 5 boats on it.
Okay. Okay.
In a loch style setting. And that's kind of like what winter fishing is all about. Like
Okay.
um, winter fishing, guys also sometimes go for certain yellowfish species. The largemouth yellowfish that I mentioned, kind of if you want to catch a trophy, that's kind of like when guys get like really big ones. It's very
Hmm.
slow fishing. You're basically fishing for 1 or 2 bites. I think it's very similar to the mindset of somebody that would fish for like a muskie.
Okay.
You're really just going for that one fish.
That one fish or that trophy.
Yeah,
You were
that one
saying.
fish, or you just hate your life after losing one.
It sounds
Yeah,
like fishing in general, right? You
yeah,
had mentioned the yellowfish though earlier, and you were talking about the dry fly fishing.
yes.
Is it customary for you to really focus in on the dry fly fishing? Is that what most of your customers or clients enjoy doing, or is it is it more of a combination of like, hey, look, we like the nymph form, we like the fish streamers, etc. But
Mm,
it sounded like the follows and the way that they eat on dry flies is just exhilarating.
yeah, so I would say, guided hosted trips would normally be at places where it's more conducive to like dry fly fishing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so your your average, if you're just going for an average day of fishing, maybe like a day, like we do some day guiding as well, to a lesser extent, but that type of fishing would mostly be nymph fishing. So, like your Euro nymphing. And then towards the end of the day, you might look out for a bit of a dry fly hatch, or it's very hatch orientated.
Okay.
But I would say the venues that you would kind of like book a trip. Um, these trips are in places where the yellowfish are a bit more free rising. So they're not really feeding on anything specific. They purely, you've got a few things that you'll have to have is clarity, not that much food on the river, or like in the river itself. But I must say they are quite, when the water starts heating up, and if it's clean water and you put a bit of a hopper or beetle or something like that out there, gives a bit of a plop. For example, we've got a lake called Stadfontein Dam,
Mm-hmm.
where you also get yellowfish, and that lake is also known for dry fly fishing. Um, so if you put that yellowfish in a certain environment, they kind of like switch to the dry.
Mm.
Um,
And you can entice
and
them up.
it, yeah, yeah. So often you can either go kind of like very big dry flies, like big hoppers, like make like a real noise when you slap it down. Um, and for example, like that lower vol trip that I was talking about, that's kind of like that works quite well there. Um, but what I also like to fish is little bait fish. You know, kind of like mini krelix, stuff like that.
Okay.
The little jig buggers. I don't think a lot of people targeted them really that way, but I think the more I started like fishing for them, like kind of like competitively, sometimes I would, if fish are not really moving for the nymphs, I would switch to like those jig buggers style flies for trout. But then I started realizing the smallmouth yellowfish also react to that, so it actually shows they're also quite predatory in some
Mm-hmm.
stages. So it's you can catch them in so many ways. I mean, some days I actually try and see how many techniques I can catch them on.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds fun.
So it can be very visual, very heart stopping kind of fishing, and they're quite strange sometimes. They'll come up to your dry all the way and then kind of like refuse it and slap it or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes you get like proper like rejection.
Yep.
So, or they'd literally just come up to it and nose it and never eat it. So you get like that real proper rejection.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Right.
yeah, so I would say, yeah, like it can be very like exciting type fishing, very visual. You can sometimes see the fish rising for like 2 meters before it eats your fly.
Huh.
So So, and like, there's a lot of fly patterns that kind of like were developed on this. Like, for example, there's a fly called the Doctor's Beetle. And this guy kind of like used a technique where he painted foam in a certain way where it's still soft.
Hmm.
And it looks so, it looks, I think there's a similar pattern called a gum beetle or something like that. But it looks so like realistic, like that. I don't know if you know Christmas beetle, those brown, shiny
Yeah,
shimmer
it's got the
beetles.
shimmery
Yeah,
aspect to it, that reflective, like
yeah,
almost like an opal effect to it.
yes, 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 exactly. Yeah, like we get that kind of beetles and like black beetles, and hoppers can be quite big. Like you can sometimes like a size 10 hopper. Um, So quite big dry flies sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
or other times very, very delicate, like size 18 little dry fly.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so they can be quite selective as well. Um, but
And when
yeah,
you,
but it's quite a, yeah.
the question would be, when you hook them, you had mentioned
Yes,
before, okay, now I've targeted them, I've got the beetle or the grasshopper, and we get the take. Um,
yes.
you hook set, kind of describe what the action is after that. You'd said sometimes they'll throttle you for a bit and then they'll lay down. Do you fight them
So,
very much like a trout, or is it different? I'm interested to hear that.
so smallmouth yellowfish, um, like I always thought would, they're stronger than trout. And then I would say I had a New Zealand trip and I got into like some really big wild trout that had like massive tails,
Mm-hmm.
so really felt that kind of power. But a yellowfish is a very, like the smallmouth yellowfish specifically. So the largemouth yellowfish is a bit lazy, like it's attacks the thing and then will try and break you off and then kind of give up. But a smallmouth yellowfish, they will like especially on dry fly, they'll come up, grab your fly, and then just hit into fifth gear and just take you sometimes into your backing.
Hmm.
So um, when I nymph for them, I have worked out techniques where you can not give them any line. Like you kind of manipulate the rod, especially with those long Euro nymphing rods. You can kind of like guide them. It's almost like it's a strange thing. It's if you fish lights for them with that Euro nymphing rods, 2-3 weights.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like you shouldn't fight them hard because then they want to fight you hard.
Gotcha. Yep.
But but I find with dry fly fishing often it's purely they get a fright. And when these fish get a fright, I mean, I've had fish that literally you set the hook and it's almost like you hit a nerve or something. And this thing just in that first run, it goes. And I mean, so the biggest ones I've landed personally is about 9-10 pounds.
Okay. Yeah.
But I've lost some like smallmouth yellowfish that were bigger than that. That's kind of like in that mythical kind of like 14-15 pound range.
Wow.
And that's a extremely powerful fish when they get to that size because they kind of stop in length and they start getting deep.
Tall. Okay.
So
Huh.
yeah, so it's like very like not like fat, but kind of like deep and very powerful. Because they've got these like very sharp tails. They're actually very similar. If you look at the shape, it's very similar to like a bonefish, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll give you that type of fight, like where they just go flat out. In like, for example, in riffles, it's like shallow water. They can really like go for it. If you kind of like lose control of them, where they get downstream of you, it's gets messy.
Yeah, I could see
So
that getting messy really
yeah,
fast. When
but
you're fishing for them, the line strength, like the tippet strength, where are you at on that? Is it a 10 pound? Are you fishing heavier than that? Like,
so so the thing is, it's quite a big fish, but they'll refuse you, So when I'm fishing like Euro nymphing, anything from about 7 to 4x, you
okay,
know,
so very
I
much
kind of
like
like,
trout.
yeah, so I kind of see what I can get away with. If I go to that kind of those extremes like 7x, then I'm probably single nymphing. I'm not trying to have like droppers and anything that can break off. Dry fly fishing is kind of like the same, kind of like whatever you can get away with. But if you're fishing like maybe like a bit of a different technique, like streamers, I'll probably like more towards like the 4, maybe 3x kind of
Mm-hmm.
range.
Is that because
And
the
then if you,
strike is harder too? Because you're actively
yeah,
fishing.
and yes, and you kind of don't know what you're going to hook. The the biggest thing with our river is there's a lot of species. So you rather fish as if you're going to hook a largemouth yellowfish or maybe one of these catfish. Like sometimes a catfish picks you up and then
Okay,
you've got a, yeah,
a
well,
whole
it
nother
even
world.
happens when yeah, like sometimes you get a big fright because you're nymphing here for like smallmouth yellowfish, and the next moment you hook into a 20-pound catfish, and they literally sit, or even carp. I mean, I think my biggest carp was about 30 pounds. And
Yeah,
I caught that I think I caught that on 3x.
and you're
Um,
on what, a 3 weight, 4 weight rod, probably
that was a 5 weight.
5 weight. Yep.
Yeah, so yeah, like our most popular weights are kind of like 3 and 5 weights.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Currently so Stream and Sea is one of the vision fly fishing agents in South Africa.
Okay.
So currently I'm kind of like fishing, I like to fish the products that we would actually sell. So I like to test various rods. So
Yeah.
currently I'm actually experimenting with the 2 weight 11 foot.
Okay.
Um, I don't know if it's a true 2 weight because, like Euro nymphing rods are strange. Like
Really
you've got
soft tip. Yeah.
you still have the pound the butt. So like the other day, I caught a 12-pound carp on that 2 weight.
Mm-hmm.
So I was quite impressed how quickly I could land the fish.
Yeah.
But yeah,
You,
like modern Euro nymphing rods are pretty interesting.
yeah. You got a long
But
lever,
but
right?
yeah,
You get,
yeah. Um, but yeah, like so we kind of, but yeah, like largemouth yellowfish these days, I don't like ever going below 20 pounds. Like, I mean, you sometimes just hook fish that you're not supposed to catch those things on fly rods,
yeah.
because like the bait fishermen sometimes get them up to 30 pounds, you know,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
a
That's a
pretty
hefty
powerful
fish.
fish. Yeah. I reckon if you had to like give a good reference that you guys would find like it's something in between something like a redfish and a snook. That kind of power, that real like beef behind the ears, like that strong shoulder type fish. So, but I think in terms of behavior, it's also similar to like a snook. Those real, they just don't sometimes want to eat. So, like we've got a saltwater fish they called grunter, for example, and they call that the nickname is the poor man's permit, for example.
Yeah.
Because it's also one of those fish that you might get a lot of shots at them, but to get them to eat, like the other day, I caught my first one, and I just, I think it reminded me of why I liked fly fishing. It's just like some days I just like to struggle until I catch something.
Right. Yeah. Test yourself for
So,
sure.
yeah, so we've got a lot of challenging type fish because I think because, it is quite a arid country, so a lot of our regions are pretty dry. So sometimes the fishing is pretty limited. So you kind of fish for anything.
Yeah. Okay.
Um,
But it sounds like you
so
have enough
yeah,
variety there to where you can really make the day, whatever it is. Right. I
yeah,
mean, you
no,
might go out to
definitely.
target one thing, but there's enough variety for you to go, okay, let's switch it up and really just make a day of this
Yes.
and whatnot. This is really cool. It
Yeah,
sounds like
and
a unique area to go, and I like how you related to, hey, it's your off season, so the expense isn't super high. You come down, you check out some different things, but you can also do some trout fishing, etc.
yeah,
So, a really unique region. I want to make sure we get to that tip that we were talking about earlier, and that is you had described. One of the interesting characteristics of your region is that you do get the hatches, but you're targeting other fish. Can you talk through that and maybe some of the different techniques that you might use for other fish in comparison to fishing for trout?
yeah. So there's like a little fly that I developed called the Maury. Um, I was just talking to a friend on like an instant messenger, and that was actually just a typo. That name, the Maury. So for some reason, it just made like this random autocorrect and said Maury, and it was supposed to be Mayfly. Um,
That's
so,
great. I love
but
that.
but all it is really, like I never know, like I never know if you can ever call a fly your fly. Like I never know actually. Like I've never really believed in that. But you like in America, I think a lot of guys, there's a few little changes, and now it's like this guy's type of PTN
Yeah.
tip. But essentially, what this was basically just it's a Spanish split wing style fly, but like CDC can be very finicky. So you have to wash the fly after each fish and dry it properly and treat it. So I wanted something, like often a hatch is in that last 30 minutes of the day. Like you can maybe squeeze out like 10 to 20 fish if you quick. But that's one aspect. So you want a fly that you don't have to treat a lot, um,
Mm.
but you can also see it because, like a lot of times, I'm like very low in the water and I'm trying to literally just see that little profile of the fly, and what's quite nice about the way I kind of cut this wing. So the material I use is sculpting fiber, like pretty much your EP fibers. Um, but any type of poly basically. But I like a bit of a stiffer polyyarn material, and I kind of like shape that wing so it looks like a split wing. And the other aspect, what I did was kind of like a clink hammer style hook. So you've got that kind of like body hanging in the water, and all you're seeing is the wings sticking out. But the nice thing about that type of material is there's obviously a lot of polyyarn type patterns. I think a very good American pattern is called the iris caddis. But what's nice about all these kind of like patterns is because it's tied on that material, like you literally, during that time of the day, the fish wants something that's a bit stuck in the film. And, it doesn't sit as high out the water as like CDC. And the main thing is you can always see that wing in that like low light. It's got like a very nice reflective property. But the nice thing is if you hook, like yellowfish have very soft mouths and they're quite slimy. Not too slimy, but they've got a bit of slime. But the nice thing is you can literally just blow on this fly, after you've unhooked the fish. I don't even bother taking photos or whatever. I just like catching numbers. So it's very easy just to shake off the fish, blow on the fly, and you cast again, and you're in again.
Yeah, you're not having to retreat it and everything. It's like like you said, that 30 minutes, you want to maximize your fly time on the water.
Yes, and recently I actually played around with that same fly also because I like to watch Kelly Gallup on his YouTube channel, and he actually took he had a little he also likes to tie a lot of flies with like little poly wings, and that's why I'm very skeptical naming flies because it's very similar type stuff. But the other aspect that I've also put in the fly is like a little UV ribbing, and I like to add a lot of like UV in my flies. But you can actually tie this, like the back two wings, you can actually tie two little loop wings. It actually makes it even more kind of like it pushes the front wing forward, and it makes it even better to just shake off the water and I reckon it would work probably quite well as a just a general. I find it actually quite interesting because it works sometimes in both mayfly and caddis hatches.
Yeah. It looks almost like a spinner from what I've seen.
Yeah, so I kind of like tied it as a more like a dun, but it's kind of like it works in a spinner hatch, it works in a caddis hatch, like it just gives that general impression of something that's stuck in the film. So
yeah,
but
and you had a tutorial on the website I saw.
Yeah, we posted like a little tutorial there, like a little video.
Yeah, and that's the website is streamandsea.com, right?
Yeah,
streamandsea.
streamandsea.com. Yeah, okay. So you can kind of see where we're going. Like I think I also mentioned to you we're probably also going to host some Maldives trips. I think a lot of guys from the States obviously come to those kind of like Seychelles trips. Yeah. So that's obviously also something that's not too far from our doorstep, but it's obviously quite an expensive trip.
Yeah.
But the Maldives trips, we've kind of like, it's a little bit more affordable, like guys that maybe want to kind of like on that border of getting to DIY, you know.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So, but I mean, if guys ever want to just talk to us about, because I think there's a lot of stuff in South Africa that you can come and do that's kind of like DIY, but you can also do work in some guided trips.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But the guided trips in terms of dollars is pretty affordable. You know,
Okay.
like I can maybe give a rough idea. Like you work at let's say like let's check here, like $700,
Mm-hmm.
$800 for 5-6 days of guided fishing.
Yeah, it's totally reasonable. It's far less
Yeah,
expensive than it would be here in the States. You know.
yeah. So and if you think about it, the nice thing is, um, you everything is pretty not too far. You know, like 1 or 2 days of traveling, you could be going on a game drive, for example, checking out the big five,
Mm-hmm.
lions, rhinos, you know,
Yeah.
and then the next day you can be on a river doing some exciting dry fly fishing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So, so that I think that's kind of like the maybe kind of like the appeal that might be quite appeal, or even some hunting, for
Yeah.
example.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of available hunting available here. So, there's quite a lot of diversity in terms of like a travel destination, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Peter,
And I mean,
I
it
appreciate
might,
it, man.
yeah,
This is
yeah,
great. You really gave us a great, I think, understanding of your region and what the availability is, and uh, it's helped me personally overcome what I think is a typical fear of most people in the States, and that is, oh, that's got to be an expensive trip. And really, when you take into
mm,
consideration what's available to you, like you said, in the variety, you can make a
yeah,
multitude of trips out of one trip. And with the conversion, it's the expense really isn't as much as you would think. And you don't have to go with
yeah,
these. In the States, there's probably more high end advertised
mm,
outfitters.
yes,
Whereas if you run into the actual everyday outfitter, it isn't really set to that expense, right? So,
yes,
yeah, opened our eyes quite a bit today, Peter. I appreciate that.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a lot, definitely a lot. There's so much on offer in South Africa. I mean, guys come here there's, for example, a place called Jeffreys Bay, which is like world renowned for like surfing, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So if you're somebody that's like, I think that's also kind of like where we might want to take Stream and Sea going forward. Just like touch on everything outdoors a little bit, you know, like,
Yeah. There's fantastic
because you might
climbing
get it.
there. I know there's fantastic climbing. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, like personally, we've got a place called City Rock here in Joburg. So we also do a little bit of just like indoor climbing and stuff
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that. So there's a lot of like, yeah. So it's kind of like, it's a very outdoorsy environment or culture, you know. So, and I'm pretty sure there's some guys might be a fly fisherman, but maybe he surfs, or,
Yeah.
you know, like
Yeah.
there's always like a bit of a you can actually like craft quite a nice little trip for yourself, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cool. Peter, thanks so much for being on the show. I appreciate it. If you guys want to get in contact with Peter, go to the streamandsea.com website. Peter, I'll have your contact information in the notes as well. It was great having you on the show. I think we've learned quite a bit today. Thanks again.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. All right, everyone. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, check it out, streamnc.com. I'll have everything in the notes for you, and we'll see you next week.